Hey everyone, I hope you're all having a great Monday. I hope you're doing very well because today we have some important news coming out of Pittsburgh that every Steelers fan needs to know. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay until the end because today's news is definitely going to get Steelers Nation's attention. With our eyes already set on the 21st, when the Steelers take on the Jets, the team is getting ready on the field. And you, Steelers fan watching from the other side, are you ready 2026? This is the year. Now, without any more delay, let's get right into it. What is becoming increasingly clear at Steelers training camp is that Patrick Graham may have found the foundation for what this defense needs to become, and it starts exactly where football games are often decided, at the line of scrimmage. After watching the Steelers work through training camp and seeing how the defense has performed during practices and the preseason opener against Green Bay, there is a noticeable difference in the way the front is being coached. Patrick Graham is not simply asking his defensive linemen to attack the quarterback or chase the football on every snap. He is building a front where different players have different responsibilities, where size and physicality matter, and where the defensive line can create opportunities for the linebackers behind them. That distinction is extremely important. Keeanu Benton explained that Graham is actually asking the linebackers to help keep the defensive linemen clean when they attack their gaps. At first, that might sound different from the idea that the defensive line should protect the linebackers, but when you look more closely at what the Steelers are doing, the philosophy becomes much easier to understand. Some defensive linemen are going to attack, others are going to absorb blocks, some will be asked to take on double teams, occupy offensive linemen, and prevent them from reaching the second level. And when that happens correctly, the linebackers get the freedom to read the play, diagnose what is happening, and attack downhill without an offensive lineman immediately getting into their path. That could become one of the most important elements of this entire defense. Patrick Graham himself emphasized that everything starts up front. The defensive line sets the tone, and if the Steelers want to play the kind of physical defense associated with the franchise's identity, they have to control the line of scrimmage, knock it backward, and set strong edges. And this is where the construction of the Steelers' defensive front becomes so interesting. The team has invested heavily in this group. Derek Harmon was drafted in the first round. Keeanu Benton is now secured with a 4-year extension worth $18 million per year on the new years of the deal. The Steelers have also invested in players such as Yahya Black and Gabriel Rubio, while adding veteran experience with players such as Cam Heyward and Sebastian Joseph Day. Then you add the outside linebackers to that equation. TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig give the Steelers another group that can create pressure and attack from the edge. Patrick Queen leads the inside linebacker group, and the overall idea is becoming much clearer. If the front can consistently win, the rest of the defense has a much easier job. That is why Patrick Graham's coaching style is so important. Landon Roberts, who returned to Pittsburgh and reunited with Graham after previously playing for him with the Raiders, described Graham as extremely detailed and knowledgeable. Roberts also pointed out something that could have a major impact on the linebackers. Graham has a defensive line mindset, and he wants his linebackers to remain clean. Think about what that means during a game. If the defensive linemen are putting their hands on offensive linemen and controlling the line of scrimmage, the linebackers have a much better chance to recognize whether they are seeing a run or a pass. If the offensive line is moving backward because the defensive front is attacking, that can give linebackers an immediate clue that they are dealing with pass protection. If the offensive line is reacting differently, the linebackers can diagnose the run and get into their fits. That is not simply about individual talent. That is about creating a connected defense. And Graham appears to understand that his players do not all need to do the same thing. Keeanu Benton is a perfect example. He is not necessarily the player you want constantly absorbing double teams. His strength is using his quickness and ability to win one-on-one matchups. Meanwhile, bigger defensive linemen can be used to hold blocks, absorb multiple blockers, and create space for others. That gives Graham flexibility. Instead of asking every defensive lineman to play the same way, he can build matchups around what each player does best. If one defensive lineman is better at attacking one-on-one, put him in that situation. If another player has the size and strength to handle multiple blockers, use him there. And this could become the secret weapon of the Steelers' defense. Imagine Graham studying an opponent's offensive line and identifying one matchup that he believes Pittsburgh can consistently win. Maybe it is a guard. Maybe it is a tackle. Maybe it is the center. The specific position does not matter as much as the principle. Find the weakness, then attack it repeatedly. If Pittsburgh can create favorable matchups for Benton, Harmon, and the rest of this defensive front, the impact could go far beyond simply stopping the run. Winning those matchups can collapse the pocket, disrupt blocking assignments, force quarterbacks to speed up their decisions, and create opportunities for the linebackers and edge rushers. That is how a defense becomes difficult to deal with from snap to snap, and there are already signs that the philosophy is producing results. During the preseason opener and the practices surrounding it, there were examples of defensive linemen holding up offensive linemen and preventing them from getting to the linebackers. That helped the linebackers attack the running game more aggressively. At the same time, players like Landon Roberts brought a completely different level of physicality to practice. His return was noticeable. Roberts was flying around the field, stuffing runs, blitzing, and creating disruption. His intensity helped make Sunday's practice one of the most physical and competitive sessions of training camp. There was even a major confrontation between the offense and defense after a hard hit involving Spears Jennings and Max Hurleman, with players from both sides getting involved before things were eventually settled down. Nobody wants unnecessary fights during training camp. That is not the goal, but there is a difference between losing control and playing with a competitive edge. The Steelers need the second one, and Landon Roberts appeared to bring that edge with him. There was another important development on the defensive side as well. Deshaun Elliott returned to competitive periods. After missing most of last season with an injury, Elliott had previously been participating in individual and walkthrough work, but seeing him back in full-speed competitive periods was a positive sign. He even made an impressive pass breakup against Darnell Washington in the red zone. That matters because the Steelers have questions in the secondary, particularly at safety. The defensive front, however, may be becoming one of the strongest areas of the roster, and that creates an interesting situation for Patrick Graham. If the front is strong enough, physical enough, and versatile enough to consistently create problems, the defense can potentially protect some of its weaknesses on the back end. The idea is simple: make the offense deal with problems everywhere else before it can fully expose the safety position. That does not mean the safety concerns disappear. It means Graham may be able to design the defense in a way that puts less pressure on that unit. The same principle applies to the offense, because the Steelers are also beginning to discover better roles for some of their weapons. Roman Wilson was particularly interesting during practice. After struggling to consistently make an impact when lining up outside against the Packers, Wilson saw more work from the slot, and the difference was noticeable. He looked more comfortable, got into his routes more smoothly, and made several plays, including deep receptions and catches over the middle. There was even a moment when offensive coordinator Brian Angelico praised Wilson for his release. That could be an important development for the young receiver. Mike McCarthy has talked about the importance of receivers being able to line up both outside and in the slot, but that does not mean every player has to be used identically on every snap. The Steelers appear to be learning where certain players can be most effective, and that brings Pat Freiermuth into the conversation. Freiermuth can move around the formation, but one role that continues to stand out is his ability to attack the middle of the field. With his size, speed, and ability to get behind linebackers, he can become a valuable target for Aaron Rodgers between the numbers. The Steelers are beginning to have more options on the outside as well, which could allow them to use Freiermuth more efficiently in the middle, rather than forcing him to be responsible for everything in the passing game. This is what makes training camp so important. It is not simply about installing plays on a whiteboard. It is about finding matchups, identifying strengths, and discovering where individual players can give the team the biggest advantage. But while some players are beginning to establish themselves, others are running out of time, and one of the biggest concerns is Kaleb Johnson. The second-year running back saw extremely limited action in the preseason opener, finishing with only 2 carries for 3 yards. The concern is not simply the statistics. It is the fact that other running backs are receiving opportunities ahead of him, including players such as Travis Homer, Lou Nichols, and Eli Hayden. With Jaylen Warren already established and the Steelers having added Rico Dowdle, the competition for the remaining running back spots is becoming increasingly difficult. There are only so many opportunities left. The same situation applies to several offensive linemen. Max Heyward has remained out longer than initially expected after suffering an injury early in camp. That uncertainty is important front because he had previously shown enough to generate optimism about his potential at tackle. Dylan Cook currently has an opportunity, but he has not completely secured the position. Broderick Jones has also been improving, and if Ihianacore remains unavailable, the competition could become even more interesting. Jennings Dunker is another player who needs a stronger impression. His training camp has reportedly been rough, and although he is not necessarily facing an immediate roster cut, his performance has not created the kind of confidence that would make his position comfortable. And that is the reality facing this roster now. The preseason is moving forward. The number of practices is shrinking. The players competing for the final 53-man roster cannot afford to wait for their opportunity forever. For the Steelers, the biggest story may still be Patrick Graham and what he can build with this defensive front. If he can consistently create favorable matchups, keep the linebackers clean, and use each defensive lineman according to his individual strengths, Pittsburgh could have the foundation of a much more dangerous defense. But now the question is whether these early signs will continue when the competition gets tougher and the regular season arrives. Steelers fans, after seeing how Patrick Graham is using the defensive line and how the players are responding to his system, do you believe this defensive front can become the biggest strength of the team this season? The answer to that question may depend on what happens over the next few practices, because the Steelers are reaching the point of training camp where potential has to start turning into decisions. The coaching staff is no longer simply evaluating what players can do in theory. The opportunities are becoming fewer, the preseason games are becoming more important, and several players are now facing very real pressure to show that they belong on the final roster. One of the most important battles to watch is at running back, and